Welcome, and thank you for participating in the fourth and final webinar of the 2016 Summer Solar Webinar Series. My name is Rachel Linewill, and I'm an Air Quality Planner with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. I will be moderating today's webinar. A few housekeeping items. We will have 3 presentations today with time for questions at the end of each of the presentations. Please submit questions through the chat box at the bottom of the WebEx screen during the webinar, and we'll answer as many questions as we have time for. We will also be recording the webinar. The recording, along with the presentations, will be housed on the Go Solar Texas website, which is linked at the bottom of the screen and will be on the final slide. The focus today will be on putting underutilized land to work for solar in Texas. Underutilized land provides exceptional opportunities for solar installations of all sizes. Disrupted or even contaminated land may not be suitable for commercial or residential development, but can easily support solar panel installations. Further, putting solar on these sites is often cheaper, less impactful, and raises fewer community concerns and objections than installations on greenfield sites. Today, we will be hearing from 2 external presenters. First up, we will have Steve Weiss, Senior Consultant for Efficiency and Renewables at Frontier Associates. Steve will be discussing a cost-benefit analysis of a variety of solar applications that Frontier Associates has conducted under contract through the NCTCOG's solar project funded by SECO, the State Energy Conservation Office. Next, Dan French, CEO of Brownfield Listings, LLC, will elaborate on the benefits of solar on underutilized lands, the basics of site selection, and the tools and resources available through his organization. Finally, I will also be providing a brief overview of the Repower Mapping tool provided by the Environmental Protection Agency. So first, a brief overview of who we are. We are the North Central Texas Council of Governments, or the COG, and we are a voluntary association of local governments. We are one of 24 COGs in Texas, and our main function is to transcend jurisdictional boundaries to promote sound development and facilitate cooperation among our member governments. To the right, you can see that Texas is blessed with considerable solar energy potential. Part of our goal is to help the region and the state reach various environmental goals, such as improving air quality by using zero-emissions energy sources, such as solar. The COG has expanded our involvement from an effort called the Solar Ready 2 program that we worked on through the Department of Energy's Sunshot Initiative to a statewide effort, contracting with the State Energy Conservation Office. With this effort, we are performing various tasks through the end of August 2016, as listed on this slide, including outreach and trainings such as this webinar. The goal of this project is to encourage public and private groups to expand access to solar energy systems across the state. First up, we'll have Steve Weiss. Steve Weiss has been a leader in Texas's distributed solar, wind energy, and energy efficiency sectors for nearly 20 years. He pioneered development of and has made major contributions to the continued success of most of the state's utility-sponsored solar incentive programs, played key roles in enabling solar leasing and commercial PACE, or Property Assessed Clean Energy, financing in Texas, and achieved a unanimous recommendation to substantially boost local solar goals as chairman of Austin's Local Solar Advisory Committee in 2012. Steve has been an active contributor to both the Texas Solar Energy Society and the Texas Renewable Energy Industries Alliance, or TRIA, having recently served as TRIA's president for 3 years. Steve currently works as a senior consultant in energy efficiency and renewable energy at Frontier Associates, where he leads and contributes to diverse projects related to distributed solar energy, energy efficiency, demand response, behavioral approaches to conservation and load shifting, and energy market and policy development. Thank you for being here, Steve.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, thank you again for having me, and I appreciate all of you who are attending this session. I have been working on a project with NCTCOG over the past couple of months, and we're looking to wrap it up over the next 1 month or 6 weeks or so, concerning benefits and costs of model solar applications for local governments. A little bit about Frontier Associates and what we do. We are a consulting firm based here in Austin. We've done work for electric utilities, gas utilities, including municipal utilities, regulators, other local government agencies, and energy consumers for about 15 years. Mostly our work is concerned on the demand side of the energy equation. The demand side includes things like energy efficiency, energy conservation, renewable energy, although renewables, people don't always think of them as demand side because it's generation and not demand savings, but when it's located on a customer side of the meter, at the ends of the distribution system, it shows up on the system looking just like energy efficiency or conservation. We also do work in demand response, rate negotiation, and even market design. We do a lot of our work here in Texas, but also nearly everywhere else, from coast to coast in the United States, from California, New England, recently and currently, in fact, doing some work in Canada as well. And I'll finally say that much of our work really is on the frontiers of energy. So renewables comprise a portion of that, especially solar, storage, smart grid applications, and a lot of new work in kind of data and analytical approaches to saving energy. So I wanted to lead off before we kind of dive into the specific work that we're doing with NCTCOG by just kind of talking about what's been happening in the solar and storage industries over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's really a combination of things. There are technological improvements happening all over the world that lead to increasing efficiency and reliability of the devices that are able to be sold in the marketplace. There are also manufacturing improvements and greatly increasing manufacturing volumes. And all of these trends together, in fact, reinforce each other through rapidly declining costs. So here you can see a couple of graphs. The solar graph on the top just shows through 2014, from 1998 to 2014, how much the installed cost of solar energy systems has come down. You can see a very precipitous decline since 2009 to 2014. Solar, frankly, cut its cost by half in that period. If you extended that out to 2016 and beyond, you'd see those numbers continue to come down. Storage is in a similar story and a similar trajectory, although perhaps a few years behind solar in terms of finding its way into the market. So one thing a term that comes up sometimes in the solar industry is a term called grid parity. And the idea is that solar prices get low enough at some point that it makes more sense to buy energy from installing solar than it does perhaps to buy it off of the grid. That's the grid parity. And a lot of people kind of think of grid parity as a point in time, like a sort of magic moment where this crossover happens. And the reality is that it's a process. And we've been undergoing this process of grid parity probably for 15 years or more, where 15 years ago there were certain applications of solar in certain places and under certain conditions where it already made sense to use solar as opposed to a grid alternative. And as we move forward through time and as the price of solar continues to decline, we see that area or areas and applications in which solar can be cost effective expanding to new territory, new terrain. So in the United States, for example, on the coasts where energy prices tend to be a bit higher, solar has taken hold more than it has done so here in Texas. So Texas is a little bit behind, certainly other areas of the United States and other areas of the world. Same as with storage, although, again, I think storage is a couple years behind that. But all of you have probably heard about Tesla and automotive batteries and gigafactories and all of these things which are combining to bring the cost of storage down as well. So that's really why we're here, is because all of this declining cost and increasing number of applications that become of interest have created an interest from NCTCOG and its members to provide guidance to local government officials in understanding the benefits and costs of investments in solar and storage on public facilities. There's all kinds of different applications and deal structures that we might consider. So the approach and method that we've taken in this project is first to provide a review of potential applications, trends, system components, and common financial structures of deals that involve solar and storage, as well as local governments. Again, there's a nearly infinite number of combinations that we could put together, but they tend to fall into several categories that are most common. Second, we built a benefit cost model, which involved defining the inputs and the outputs and essentially creating a financial pro forma tool. And the approach that we've taken with that is to essentially split the analysis of the benefits and costs into two categories. One that we call direct financial benefits and costs, which include all of the items that will accrue to the local government's balance sheet or financial statements. And then a second one that just talks about additional community impacts. There are other things that happen with a solar installation. For example, you can claim some emissions reductions, but those won't show up on your balance sheet unless you can sell them someplace. So we try to quantify both the direct financial benefits and costs as well as other community impacts. We've tried to zero in on 5 different model solar applications and define the input parameters for each one, and then run our model, summarize the results, and provide some conclusions and recommendations about which of these models may look to be more attractive than others, and what the key variables are for making them attractive to local governments. So here's a summary of the model applications that we're looking at. At the top is what we call simple grid-tied solar. This happens to be a photograph of a fire station in McKinney, Texas. And basically any building or any facility, public facility with an energy load is a potential candidate to install solar someplace, which can offset the amount of energy that's required by that facility to be purchased from the grid or from a utility. So you produce some of it on your own, it's less that you need to purchase from the utility. So the simplest model is just this, solar panels on a building. A lot of local communities in Texas have done projects like this already. The second row refers to essentially the same kinds of systems, but with additional benefits aside from just the energy that's created by the solar energy system. So 2 that we're focusing on, one is solar on landfills or contaminated sites. This happens to be a photo of a project in San Antonio at a landfill that sells energy to the local municipal utility. And solar on shading structures for airports or other public facilities where shade can be valuable. This is a picture of a carport, but also parks increasingly in Texas are putting up, local governments are putting shade structures on parks and other facilities as well to provide the benefit of shade. Sometimes these benefits can be direct financial benefits, and other times they're just benefits of, that can't be quantified that way, but it's a benefit to the local community. And the last category is really solar with storage, solar combined with storage. So the first example is grid-tied solar with storage. We add if you take that fire station at the top and you add a big battery bank, you increase the capabilities of that fire station or other emergency services facility to ride through outages on the grid during storms and to maintain basic services for a longer period of time. Mobile storage are not connected to the grid. but include trailer-mounted or skid-mounted systems that can be moved around and dropped someplace where there's a need, typically a smaller need, to power emergency signs, for example, or to provide power to an intersection, say, that isn't working until we can restore power to that location. So there's a lot of different applications, and these are just 5 categories of applications that we've tried to zero in on. When we talk about benefits and costs, I mentioned before, we divide it into direct financial benefits and costs, and you can see what we talk about or what we consider in direct financial benefits and costs. Remember, these are the benefits and costs that accrue to the financial statements of the local government who's considering the investment. So obviously there would be electric bill savings, property tax revenues when you've got private property or a privately owned solar development on a piece of property that can increase the property value and increase the potential tax values coming into the local government. Value of shade and shelter sometimes can be quantified as a financial benefit. For example, at airports where covered parking can be rented out at premium rates over non-covered parking. And then the last couple of benefits there have to do with have to do with storage, time of use arbitrage, and resiliency benefits. Basically, the idea is that storage enables you to purchase some energy while it's cheap, if you're on a time of use rate, and then to discharge that energy when the energy is more expensive later in the day, and keep doing that every single day and make up the difference in the price that is saved. Resiliency quantifies the value, essentially, of having that insurance policy, of having a backup generation on site that can carry you through different outages. So the way that we try to value that resiliency is somewhat complicated, but there are ways of trying to quantify what the likelihood of different outages is and what the financial value of those outages are across a sector. So that's what we're trying to do with resiliency. The direct financial costs are listed there. They're pretty straightforward, and you can see the direct financial metrics that we output from that analysis. Additional impacts, local jobs and economic development. We use a model from the National Renewable Energy Labs to quantify not only the direct benefits to the local economy of the investment in solar and storage, but also there are induced benefits. So when people get paid wages, they spend money in the community and so on. And this model from the National Renewable Energy Labs helps quantify or estimate some of those values. You can see some of the other community impacts: increasing public awareness, making more productive use of otherwise unproductive land. And in fact, it could be productive land or it could be unproductive roof space. A lot of public agencies own a lot of fairly empty roof space that can be put to a productive use. Extending emergency services capabilities as well. Like I said, we're not finished with this report. We plan on providing a report as well as a set of financial pro forma statements, actually pro forma models that can be used and adapted by local governments to specific projects that they are considering, and also some kind of close-ups on the model applications that we have developed and run the benefit cost analysis on. So preliminary conclusions at this stage are that solar storage and solar storage combinations are becoming increasingly cost-effective in local government applications. Grid-tied solar is already cost-effective, especially when its costs are reduced with available grants or utility incentives. Storage might be cost-effective where the value of that backup power is pretty high. So it's really depends on what you're backing up and how we value that requirement to be able to extend backup power over a certain period of time. Some potential value streams provided by solar and storage are currently difficult or impossible to capture, but mechanisms should be developing as market interest increases. So we work with some storage companies and try to figure out how, what are all the different value streams that storage can attach to and earn for the consumer or for a utility or for the grid operator. And frankly, there are some benefits out there that a consumer might be able to grab hold of, but there might not be means or mechanisms for these other values to be realized yet in the marketplace. So market structures are developing, and we think that the value of storage, there's an intrinsic value now, but not all of that value is able to be captured quite yet. Other potential value streams are difficult to quantify. What is the value of resiliency? How important is it to this specific load to keep it running over a day, over an hour, over a week? These are all questions that depend on what the function of that facility actually is. So I mentioned we're providing model applications and financial pro formas to provide base scenarios, and these should be available over the next couple of months. We can help local governments adapt those models to specific use cases, and I guess it's ultimately up to NCTCOG, but I think the final report and tools should be available over the next few months, certainly by the fall of this year. And that's where I will conclude, unless there are any questions. Let me put my, well, I was trying to put my contact information up there, but it looks like we're going to move on to Dan French. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We've got your contact information back up for anybody who wants it, and it will be provided again at the end of the presentation, at the end of the webinar. We will give just a couple of seconds if any questions come in. Otherwise, we will have time as well at the end of the webinar if anybody has questions they'd like to submit. Okay, we're going to move on then. Our second speaker is Dan French. Dan is a licensed attorney and transaction expert with domestic and international experience. His U.S. practice has focused on real estate transactions, environmental risk transfer, and redevelopment. His transactional experience encompasses thousands of properties of all conditions across 24 states, with more than $1 billion of property and environmental liability successfully transacted. Dan is leading a redevelopment renaissance within the larger real estate revolution, a technologic, civic, social, and market-based movement lifting the form and function of humanity's built environment to new heights, taking the health and wealth of our communities with it. He believes proactive due diligence is the difference in successful real estate transactions and in life. Thanks for being here, Dan. I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you.
It's all yours.
That was an awesome introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you great.
Awesome. Thanks. So, yeah, Dan French, I'm the CEO of Brownfield Listings. I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit from where Steve was before we dial back in. As you could tell from my introduction there, we are very constructive. I'm happy to be joining you today. I'm particularly excited to be sharing kind of a market update with you at this time because it has been very exciting these last several years. It may not feel like that everywhere. You may not hear a lot of talk about it, but certainly in my space and in our industry, we've seen kind of generational change. So I'm an oil man. I don't know if that was in my bio or not. I used to work for BP, so I have a lot of love for Texas. I'm not exactly a solar guy, more a real estate guy and energy, but I care a lot about energy, and it was only, 8 or 9 years ago that the price of a barrel of oil exploded to $150 a barrel. And, you know, we were worried about Mad Max Thunderdome and the end of the world. The financial crisis came soon after. But we've rebounded incredibly strongly. I would say to you now, I think redevelopment fundamentals in the United States are stronger than they've ever been, really across all asset classes, including industrial. Unlike many recessions, we have actually gained some manufacturing jobs back this cycle, unlike the last 35 years or so. Not too many, but we have reshored hundreds of thousands of jobs, and we're going to talk about, you know, some of the reasons why that is here in a second. But first, I don't know if we snuck in a definition of brownfield, but we like to do that. We are brownfield listings. To us, it's really an umbrella term. As an attorney, I always have to ask the brownfield questions in a transaction. Is it contaminated or not? That's what a brownfield really means. It's something where we don't know. People guess, there's subjective opinion, sometimes there's market stigma, but there's really no data to back it up. So properties have to pass through the brownfield prism kind of each time it trades hands, or it should. So within the brownfield space, you know, there's all kinds of different segments and subsegments, stream and wetland restoration. As Steve mentioned, you know, there's been innovation. Technology is driving change really like we've never seen. I hate to throw out the word Jetsons, but really when you look at all the incredible things that are happening in the many different segments of the real estate space, it's pretty incredible. We're building a more sustainable, durable, resilient world, and it has more economic value. I think people are happier with clean streets and sidewalks and trees and shade. It's hard to quantify. As Steve said, you won't find it on a balance sheet. But in terms of quality of life, I think you know, there's so much that we can do, low-hanging fruit, that I'm pretty excited about this next cycle. Okay, can I click? Yeah, there we go. A little bit of a delay. That's okay. So part of the reason that the United States is so strong is just our pure physical advantages. We have a lot of land. I lived in Europe for a time. They have 1/3 of the land area and more people, and they don't have very much energy at all. We have a lot of the world's fresh water. We have ample grain and freedom, of course, but we also have a lot of sunshine, as you can see on this map. But as Steve also mentioned, it's really been not where we have the dark red areas have the most solar assets, so to speak. But with the exception of California, and with respect to landfills specifically, it's really been the Northeast and some of the Rust Belt states that have led the way. Even though they're kind of green there, they don't have as much sun, but they do have higher electricity rates, and they have a lot of states have very good incentives. And when you stack those two together, the economics become pretty compelling. But there have been EPA tracks bright field development or solar on landfill development. And I think that there's been 2 projects that I'm aware of. One is there where Steve is in Texas. It was the Central Texas Veterans Landfill. It was a project by the Department of Veterans Affairs. And then there was another one, oh, I'm sorry, that's in Temple. The one in Austin was the General Grove Landfill. It was about 10 acres. So as you can see on this chart, I wanted it to kind of fade in one at a time, but our electricity in the United States is some of the cheapest in the developed world, and we've really got our main competition whooped. You know, industrial rates in the EU today are almost double. And in China, particularly in Shanghai, they have some of the most expensive electricity in the world. You pretty much have to build a new facility to get the power that you need. And so this is the reason why we're winning. It's being held down principally by fracking and natural gas. But this is a huge competitive advantage. It's the reason why so much global capital is coming to the United States. We've won foreign direct investment the last 3 or 4 years in a row, beating out China, beating out the EU. So it's pretty incredible, and I can't be positive enough. And so the economics are really changing. And those were just averages on the last slide. In some, you know, particular municipalities, rates are a lot different than the average. It's Texas that's holding down the U.S. at that 6 cents, because you guys have some of the cheapest, or your area, the South in general, has very cheap electricity rates. Okay, so now I want to dial in and talk a little bit more about brownfields and why they're particularly useful for solar applications. First, the general just greenfield versus brownfield question, which we're always asking, every developer is asking whether they want to build solar or whether they want to build mixed use or condos. And with respect to solar, brownfields have definite advantages, especially today. So zoning, permitting, and public opinion, people want more green space and not less. They want more open space these days and not less. And so this question, when it comes up, where will we put the solar panels, we're finding that the public tends to rally against solar applications in green space. So brownfields make perfect sense. They're already disturbed land. They may be contaminated, and no one tends to cause too much of a fuss. On the other hand, of course, zoning and permitting a brownfield for solar redevelopment or any development can be more arduous and take a longer time. But for our audience on today's call, you have a lot more control over the zoning and the permitting process. If the public sector stakeholders are aligned behind solar, it's a path of least resistance. And developers need to know that, right? If you can communicate that to a developer, that you're on board with this, that they're not going to suffer too many snags in the permitting process, and they'll feel better about being able to turn over that project and meet their bottom line. There's cost savings, as Rachel mentioned at the top of the call. A lot of these sites, as legacy sites, they have existing interconnection, and some of it is at very high capacity. They also have legacy infrastructure. You don't have to build roads. There may be buildings that you can salvage. It may be fenced. And then location. It may have existing interconnection, but it also may be very close to substations or the grid itself. And then, very importantly, as Steve mentioned as well, it's proximity to existing end users, where if you're a brownfield property, chances are you're surrounded by some higher intensity uses, big energy consumers, and you may be able to develop that over-the-fence relationship and sell them power directly. It's booked as savings. They're buying less from the utility. But it's a very common and growing deal structure. And then green on brown benefits, this is really sustainability and resilience. Steve did a good job. I won't belabor this point too much, but there are obvious sustainability gains as applied to brownfields, particularly all the good things about renewable and green and sustainable. But because with a brownfield, you're starting at a negative, you have a net negative kind of environmental value, and you're taking it from that negative and not just right-siding it, but adding, renewable gains on top. It's kind of a double sustainability win. And then solar is an awesome use for a brownfield where they're just use challenged. You can turn some of these contaminated properties into parks and caps, or with caps, or sometimes not, but solar is a good option. So, as a land use option, it's not just turning it into a nice park or providing some ecosystem services, planting some trees, doing some phytoremediation, but you can earn electrons and earn dollars. So it's a use, and a very productive use, applied on land where no use could go before. And it's a low-intensity use. This is particularly important in an urban setting, and we're seeing more urban applications, as I'll get to in a moment, but there's no noise. There's no effluence, and there's no traffic generated by this demand, or this end use. There's not going to be a lot of trucks. There's some minor maintenance. But for the most part, unlike a lot of kind of commercial industrial uses, there's not going to be a lot of activity. It will just kind of sit there and do its thing, capture the rays. A long-term interim use, this is kind of a land use joke. It's kind of an oxymoron. But solar is easy to set up, and it's easy to take down. So when we're thinking about solar projects being put in today with 20-year life cycles or thereabouts, we're really just going to be producing electrons on these things, and then in the 2030s, figuring out whether we want to, box it down and do something else with it. And with this push towards that Jetsons utopia that I was talking about before, who knows where technology will be. We're seeing a lot of innovation in the remediation space, and properties that were not cost-effective to remediate 20 years ago are becoming cost-effective today. So it's flexibility. And then this is pretty important too, again, in a brownfield context, it's the pathway to closure. We have a lot of contaminated properties or those brownfields where nobody really wants to get the process started for fear of the end use. What are we going to do with this thing? And solar is something that everyone can get behind in the public sector, the EPA, through its Repowering America's Land initiative, which Rachel's going to talk about in a moment, but the Department of Energy and, just in general, the full weight of the federal government and most state governments are behind this. So when we're thinking about how to negotiate remediation remedies, solar is a nice pathway that can bring alignment, and we're seeing this more and more as it kind of catches on. And there's a lot of those, there's been project success, basically. People are not just wondering how to do this. There's plenty of good examples, which we'll get to in a moment. So where is the market? Well, developers are entering the market. Again, EPA tracks a lot of brownfield, brightfield success. There's a project matrix that you can find, but there's been more than 100 of these types of contaminated landfill properties successfully redeveloped. Many developers have had success with it, and more all the time. We get calls, even foreign calls now from Canada and China of people looking for real estate in the United States. So the market is definitely taking off. And I wanted to share with you, I wanted to give you some examples of kind of leading developers and give you an idea of the types of things that they're looking for. Some things we've already mentioned, like interconnection or existing infrastructure. For them, the most important thing is penciling out a project that will return, right? These are for-profit enterprises generally. So one is PV Navigator. They're out of California. They are looking for closed landfills, so not open landfills, minimum of 4 acres or about 1 megawatt. But ideally, they're looking to do like a 3 megawatt project, which is about 12 acres. And they want to lease your property, and they will look for an off-taker. They will look for someone to sell power over the fence to. And they're looking for these municipal situations. Maybe the city owns the landfill, or they have a utility as well, or they have the wastewater treatment plant. If the city is consuming a lot of power, as Steve mentioned, there's ways to generate savings through many different applications. Then Community Green Energy, they are out of Wisconsin, and they're kind of leading the charge on what's called community solar, which you can guess from the name, and that is multiple parties kind of coming together. Solar garden is a term, so you can imagine like a small residential complex or a business park or whatever it might be, many individuals or entities coming together to kind of co-own a project. And something else that we've seen is the size of projects really coming down. So when 10 years ago, we really needed a lot of acres and a lot of megawatts for these projects to pencil out. But as costs have come down and technology has changed, improved so much, Community Green Energy, they'll come down and maybe do just 1 acre, which is pretty awesome, especially for urban brownfields. Or you're thinking about, what inventory do I have available in my city? 1 acre is a pretty good threshold to work with. In addition to the rooftops and things that Steve mentioned, there's all kinds of places where we can apply solar panels. But if you have that old small urban brownfield or that old junkyard or whatever it might be, there are ways and deal structures that can make it pencil out for all. And then the last one, really on the other side of the spectrum from Community Green Energy, is Solar Turf, and also across the spectrum from PV Navigator. They're looking for open landfills. They have some remediation technology as well, and they're looking to remediate the property and build solar at the same time. So these pre-closure properties, these contaminated properties, at Brownfield Listings, we actually call them red fields, like a red flag, for things that are hot and need to be remediated. So they're a great example of someone really pushing the envelope. Most developers that I've encountered, that you're likely to encounter, are looking for pre-closure or post-closure situations. They don't want to get snagged down in regulatory timelines right? They want to do these projects and move on to the next one. So they want the remediation situation to be clear, but solar turf is not. They're ready to come in a little earlier, a lot earlier, and take on some extra risk. So many more properties could be developed as solar than was true just a few short years ago. So I want to give you a few quick examples of properties that have come through our marketplace. This is the Elmore Greenfield here. I just convinced you all that Greenfields were inferior sites to Brownfields and Redfields. But this is a property that came through. It was 52 acres. It's city-owned. They have their own utility, serving about 1,000 people. And they wanted to lease it in the short term, but then maybe purchase this facility themselves at a later date. They didn't want to develop the entire 52 acres, but carving out kind of a portion. It's by the highway that you can kind of see the exchange there. To, again, generate some cost savings for them. This was an RFP that came through our website, was successfully bid on, and I'm going to run through several of these, and I show you them as good examples. You can download this RFP yourself and take a look at it, for all kinds of insights and maybe ideas and inspirations. So then really on the other side of the spectrum, not a greenfield, this is what we call a redfield, the old Kirby Tower recycling facility. It had a major fire in 1999. You may have seen it on the news. It was remediated, and there was a covenant not to sue issued by EPA. But the real, this is a great example of solar being the carrot that drove this property forward. There was a multi-party MOU that cleared the liens only upon a solar development. So as all the local and federal stakeholders got together and figured out what's going to happen with this property, they decided solar is what's going to happen. And so they set that up and kind of made their own market, published an RFP, and they got the interest that they wanted. And now this property will be put back into productive use and kind of put its legacy of contamination behind it. And again, you can, if you're interested afterwards, I can send you this RFP. And then this is awesome. This is in Connecticut, where they've done a lot of landfill work, and this is another kind of just good transactional example of a 3-in-1. MIRA, which is the Connecticut Materials Innovation and Recycling Authority, it's really been driven kind of from the top down in Connecticut. MIRA has a lot of authority, I guess, for lack of a better word. They're working with multiple communities, and they package these three together into one RFP. Which was pretty cool. And each one's a little bit different. The first one, Waterbury, is a 3-acre urban infill site. It was a closed landfill right on the utility corridor. The Shelton landfill, a little bit different, residential area right next to a park, and solar is going to look a lot better than just the old landfill fenced off. And then the Ellington landfill, this is a 38-acre rural site, which was closed in 1999. It's surrounded by productive farmland, as I mentioned before, when you're doing kind of the green versus brown question. This is a pretty good place. If you've got a landfill out in the rural areas, no one's going to raise a fuss so long as you're not turning over productive farmland. Okay, so a little bit about Brownfield listings now. I'm going to kind of pivot and talk about specifically how to access the market. We're a national project marketplace for revitalization, remediation, and redevelopment. We're a free platform for the most part. We have a huge freemium, especially if you're a lister or you have a project, but we do have premium pay-for features. It's an internal tool that you can use to collaborate and share documents, work on the plan, dress up your listings and projects. But we also have external publishing tools, so you can go to market or you can engage the community, you can poll questions and things like that. But we're really trying to allow people to reach a national audience of vendors and developers that are really capable of taking on all these different properties in any condition, from Redfields on out. You can come and search for vendor profiles. You can find pros and partners. You can come search for solar developers. And we have an RFP or RFQ tool where you can publish your project and ping our entire ecosystem and attract that deal partner or project partner. It could be an assessment or you could have a fully mature project ready to go. You've already worked with somebody like Steve, you've done your assessment, you know exactly what you're looking for, I want these number of acres. If you've got it all put together in an RFP and you're ready to go to market and attract a developer, we can get you there, get you to market. And we do that with we have a portfolio feature where we can kind of brand sites together and run really mini markets, and we're doing that for Brownfield. So we have the Brownfields portfolio for potential solar sites across the country. It's free, and it's a clear path to market. That's really the most important thing. It's really fundamental behind everything we're doing at Brownfield Listings. We are a marketplace of misfit properties, and you can come and find specialists for those misfit properties on our website, just in general, but also specifically applied to solar. People looking for landfills to do solar. But we're focused on sites that are really an acre or larger. All of the developers, the folks we're working with, that's kind of where their site selection cutoff is. There's really no upper limit, I don't think. The formal RFPs can be attached. We have those developers specializing in the brownfields, the closed landfills, and even the pre-closure sites and pre-remediation sites. And then like Community Green Energy, we have developers installing the community-owned project whose electricity is shared by multiple households or multiple users. And then we also have free matchmaking, which pairs Brownfield sites with solar developers. And it's easy to access. You can just go to our website, you can register a free user account, you create a free listing organization, and you create a basic listing. Use the Brownfield tag and you're off and running. You can email any questions always at info@brownfieldlistings.com, or you can email me at dan@brownfieldlistings.com. Thanks, I look forward to your questions.
Dan, thank you so much. We haven't seen any questions come in at the moment, so again, we will review at the end of the webinar or send on emails directly so we can make sure any questions that do come in get answered. I'm now going to cover very quickly the Environmental Protection Agency's Repowering America's Land Initiative tools. Through its Repowering America's Land Initiative, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency encourages renewable energy development on current and formerly contaminated lands, landfills, and mine sites. To support that goal, the initiative developed a number of downloadable computer tools that guide interested parties through a process for screening sites for their suitability for solar PV installations. The tools can also be used to screen for wind installation suitability as well. As you can see from the list on this slide, the tool addresses a wide variety of sites, including many of those we've already discussed in today's webinar, as well as commercial and industrial rooftops, which we've already said might also be considered underutilized space. The first tool I want to share with you is the decision tree tool. The decision tree walks users through yes or no questions, screens for site characteristics and criteria, and generates reports of the screening results. This is useful if you have a specific site in mind and you're curious as to whether or not it is suitable for a solar installation. As an example, I'm actually going to open up the tool here on my screen to show you how it works. Once you've installed the application and you've gone through the basic tutorial, this is what your application is going to look like. You put in the site information. That's okay. Oh, I've done this already once, so we're going to try something different. NCTCOG. Okay. The tool just walks you through a series of different yes or no questions, basic information that either you have at your fingertips or you can get through a little bit of research. We're going to say that this one is rooftop, solar PV, installation type, rooftop, and so on and so forth. Yes or no questions. Over here, you can see there's an explanation for the reasoning behind the questions, and you can click for more information on any of the pieces of information they're looking for. I won't go through the entire series, but this is just to give you a sense of how easy it is to use this tool, and the more details that you have about the specific site, the easier it will be to walk through and get a sense of whether or not the site you have in mind is suitable for solar. Again, the tool is intended to engage non-experts. I'm going to close out here and get back to our present. Oh, how do I go back? Yeah, hang on, I'm going to get back to our screen. Okay, we're back in business. The tool, as I said, is intended to engage non-experts in renewable energy to screen potential sites. It's built, though, so that more knowledgeable professionals can quickly navigate through the decision tree, and less experienced stakeholders can access additional information through the explanation pane on the right-hand side. Keep in mind that this tool is intended as a preliminary guide, and detailed site-specific assessment would need to follow this kind of initial screening. If you, going back. Sorry. If you don't have a specific site in mind already, the EPA has actually pre-screened over 2,400 sites in Texas for 3 scales of solar PV energy. The maps you'll see on these next slides were developed by COG staff using the Geographic Information Systems, or GIS files, also available on the Repowering America's Land Initiative website. This first map illustrates the potential capacity for solar at sites around the state. We're looking at different sizes. The next assesses both scale and connectivity options. We have off-grid PV in red, utility scale PV in the blue triangles, and large scale on the green circles. And finally, the third provides a detailed view of a specific area, in this case, the NCTCOG service region. If you're interested in a region-specific map for your COG area, please contact us following this webinar, and we'll be happy to share the ready-to-use shapefile for each COG level boundary. Finally, much of this information has been integrated into a Google Earth application, which is also available through the same website. I'm going to click through and show that to you in a minute. The image shown on this slide is of the primer document that walks users through the most detailed and hands-on version of all of these data tools, but I'm going to show you once more coming out of this, the Google Earth application. Through the website, you click on any one of the maps listed, and then opening up through Google Earth, you can see this pre-screened sites across the nation. As we zoom into the Texas area, each location has a profile that includes the policies and incentives enabling the solar on that site, the proximity to transmission and substation, the roads and urban centers, and the solar capacity that's been assessed for that location. So each one of these sites has a profile, and if you're just looking to get a sense in general of what's available and what has been previously assessed by the EPA in your region, this is an excellent place to start. We encourage you to explore all of these tools and the tools described in today's webinar to better understand the true solar potential in Texas, sometimes found in really unexpected places. This is the contact information for our speakers today. Have we had any? We do have some questions that have come in, so bear with us while we get a hold of those. Okay, the first question is, can you comment on options that public entities without tax appetites have for taking advantage of federal tax credits over the next 5 years or so before they expire, other than leasing? Dan or Steve, do either of you want to weigh in on that?
I'll jump in. This is Steve. You know, leasing is by far the most common form of third-party ownership, but in order to take advantage, if you are a public agency that can't take advantage of a tax credit, third-party ownership, some third-party owner who can is required. Typically in third-party ownership deals, leases are the most common, but there's also something called a PPA, or a power purchase agreement. PPAs are common where the buyer is an electric utility. So for example, if you have a municipal electric utility, those utilities often structure their supply contracts through power purchase agreements. So that's an example where a private developer could take advantage of the federal tax credits and then pass on those savings in the form of a lower price per kilowatt hour in a PPA to a public utility at wholesale.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Today's presentations, the slides, and recording will be housed on our website, gosolartexas.org. This is our contact information at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Please feel free to reach out to us directly or to the speakers directly with any additional questions. And please stick around to answer 2 quick survey questions. The first will ask if you're willing to donate the time you spent on this webinar as an in-kind match for this grant, provided your work isn't being funded by federal funds. And the second will ask you how many people are watching this webinar with you. Thank you for taking the time to complete these questions. This webinar is now over.